So, yeah, chapter 1's a cakewalk. So he is, let me get my book. So he's trying to find out ultimately, well, how's he stop chapter 1 at the end of the day? Because the last sentence he says, yeah, so he wants to figure out what essence is, basically. So, yeah, he wants to figure out what essence is, but essences of these substances, which are simple, are from a greater degree hidden from us. We must start with the essences of the composite substance, so the learning process will begin approximately with what is easier. So that's why he's talking about essences and composite substances, because he's trying to figure out what essence basically is, and because he follows the learning process, when you have an object which is composed of more parts, then it's easier to comprehend it. Obviously, that seems counterintuitive, but like I said, the reason for that is when you have a bunch of parts, you can just put them together. But when you only have one or two parts, it's so abstract and broad that you don't have enough terminology, basically, to analyze them. There's not a lot you can say about something that's completely simple. Like if you wanted to talk about a horse, you have many parts to talk about it, right? You have like the head and the body and the feet and the mane and the tail. But if you want to talk about being, there's no parts to it. There's nothing you can't say anything about it, essentially. It's the most abstract thing. Because when you're talking about something, you disseminate it into its parts. Talking about a whole, you disseminate it into its parts, and you talk about the parts and how they interrelate with it. And ultimately they compose a whole. So he wants to figure out what essence is, so he's got to talk about it in the context of things which have essences. He's not just going to talk about essence simpliciter. He's going to talk about essence as found in things. So he's going to talk about them in composite substances because there's more parts to analyze. That's basically the idea. So basically, paragraph 1 through 2, he's quickly just searching for what the essence is. So there's 13 paragraphs in chapter 2. So P1 through 2 equals searching for the essence in composite substances. Remember, composite substance is basically another word for a material object. That's all it really is. Composite substance equals composed of matter and form. So that's what he's talking about. So obviously a human being is composed of matter and form. So his question is, well, what's the essence of a human being? And right off the bat, this is really interesting because you might think you know what the essence is, right? You think it's rational animal. That's true in one sense. That's true. This is very difficult to parse out in your head. But there's a difference between epistemology and ontology, or epistemology and metaphysics. Epistemologically, as far as the human mind's understanding of something is concerned, yes, the essence is a rational animal. But we're talking about ontology, the study of being. Ontology equals the study of being. So when he says essence of a material object, he's not talking about where exactly do we find it on the Porphyrian tree, how you're used to thinking about it. He's talking about ontologically, what is that which a thing is composed of or made from? What is the what is the most fundamental principle of an object, which makes it what it is? Like, I'm trying to think of an analogy. Like, you might say, like, our fundamental principle in modern science for what an object is made of is atoms. Anything you say about what an object is made of ultimately can be reduced to just atoms, right? So he's not an atomist. He's not someone who believes in atoms, really. Well, he might, but they're kind of irrelevant. He's trying to find out what is the bottom line principle of a material object. What is the cause of its being? What makes it a thing? Like existing, like that we see in reality. Not how do we know it, but what makes it exist? What's that bottom line principle? So 1 through 2, he's searching for that. First, he says, well, he just takes away matter and essence, or matter and form, and that's a little surprising. There's a kind of a disagreement to a certain extent with Aristotle. Aristotle will say that a substance is something that's composed of matter and form, but then the substance of substance is just the form. That's kind of irrelevant here. But his point is, so first, it's not matter. Do you know what primary matter is? Or, do you know what prime matter is? Mm-hmm. What is it?
It's like, well, I know I read it, and it's on here. It's matter without any form.
Yes. So what does that mean or look like? Well, it doesn't, in some sense, mean much of anything. So that would be matter without a shape, for example. But what could that even look like? I mean, even if you had matter, you could just imagine completely amorphous goo. I think amorphous is probably a good word there. Amorphous means without a clearly defined shape or form. But if you take it in the literal sense, there is no amorphous piece of matter. It has some sort of shape. So prime matter literally has no shape because it's not informed by any idea of what something would be like. And then the question is, can this exist at all? And this is kind of a, can prime matter exist, is definitely in the category of the medievals talking about how many angels can fit on the head of a pin. This is what many people in academic philosophy straw man the medievals into being like. Now, it's true they had ridiculous debates. There's no doubt about it. And this is why it ultimately collapsed, because Descartes got trained in a Jesuit university where it was all scholasticism, and they were at this point, right? Like, you'll see even today a lot of people want to return back to hardcore Thomism because they agree 200 years after St. Thomas, things got all over the place, right? But it's like St. Thomas is the sanity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Isn't I may be wrong, but I might be thinking of a different philosopher, but didn't Descartes say I think, therefore I am?
That's Descartes.
Okay.
Descartes, yeah.
Okay.
Descartes gets a big rap of Catholics. I was actually thinking really quick that we need to move on. I'm spending too much time on this. But I don't really see why we should stop meeting after we're done with On Being in Essence. I feel like we should just keep doing philosophy.
Sure.
So I can take you through Scotus after this and Occam after that, because Scotus comes right after Aquinas, and then Occam comes right after Scotus. And what you'll be able to see is a lot of these Catholic philosophers, they want this hardcore return back to Aquinas, and they think after Aquinas, basically Scotus to an extent and Occam for sure really screwed everything up, and then you have 200 years of, actually 400 years of a lot of garbage, and then Descartes comes and just is let's just trash all of this. But what will be really important is that you'll be able to see that Scotus's critiques of Aquinas were freaking good and absolutely valuable. And then Occam's critiques of Scotus were also really good. So Scotus shows you some pretty pivotal problems philosophically with Aquinas. And then Occam, and you're dang, yeah, Aquinas was wrong there probably. And then Occam will be like, there's some big problems with SCOTUS. And then Occam has problems, and you'll see that this whole thing's pretty messy, actually, when it comes down to it. And so that's why I'm more sympathetic to modern philosophy than a lot of Catholic philosophers, because there are definitive issues with scholasticism. There's no doubt about it. Are they unsolvable? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But you'll see the point. So anyways, back to prime matter. Yes, it's matter without form. Another reason is, like, I read this on there, but, like, you would need a quantity of matter. You would need an amount, right? But quantity is an accident. It's not a substance. Quantity is not a form of something. So remember, accidents can only exist riding on a substance. So you would need an amount of matter, and if you have an amount of matter, that presupposes it's a substance already, so it has a form, because it's a composite substance, right? And now it's already in form. So I think that's a really good argument to say prime matter, like, literally could never be, because you would need an amount of it to be sure, but that amount presupposes that since the quantity is an accident, it presupposes there's a substance there, which presupposes it's already informed with the form. And the moment you have matter with form, it's not prime matter anymore. Mm-hmm. So matter in and of itself can't be the substance of something, because clearly matter needs some help to exist. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I just told you exactly why. So then you're like, well, is it essence? Well, Aquinas says it's not essence either. That's a little surprising. I'll show you why. What did I say? I'm just going to read this and then I'll figure out what I said. Obviously, this is super dense, so I just, I'm trying here at times for sure. So matter alone is not the essence, but surprisingly, form is not either. Why? This is because essence is what signifies the definition of a thing. Hence, if it was only the essence, there'd be no difference between... Yes, that's what he says, right. It's in paragraph 2. He says, the definition... there would be no difference between definitions in physics. He's calling... This is anachronistic. By the way, I know that you know that I really enjoy words. Anachronistic means belonging or appropriate to a period other than now, or what's being portrayed. So we don't use physics in the same way as he is. He's using it in the Aristotelian sense of physics. So he's just talking about material objects, generally speaking. So there'd be no difference between that and objects in mathematics. Objects in mathematics obviously are not spatiotemporal. They don't exist in space and time, right? 2 plus 2 equals 4 for eternity. Mm-hmm. There's no changing that, right? So his idea is, yes, he's equating here essence with just definition, like I opened the lecture with. But if it's just that, you can't have that, because there has to be something undergirding the fact that it exists in reality in spatiotemporal terms. And he's basically saying essence, if think about it, remember, oh gosh, this is so cool. When he is talking about, where is my dang marker? When he's talking about the essence of something ontologically, you can say that this is Aquinas talking about what is the this will clear it up perfectly. He's talking about what the cause of being is for a composite substance. Quite literally, that means what makes there nothing here in space and time to something, right? There's no oak tree, and then it produces a seed, and then there's an oak tree. What is the cause of being for a composite substance? Well, if essence is just the definition, definitions are immaterial. They're just words. They're an idea, right? So how could something immaterial that's just a definition of something cause the being of a material object, right? That doesn't make any sense. They're not begot, it doesn't just beget something. another way of putting it is like God's immaterial, but God has to actively decide to create something in matter. But if it was just essence, since essence is completely immaterial, you would have to say that material things are necessarily, it's just of the nature of something which is immaterial to beget or cause the existence of a material thing. But clearly that's not what's going on. So he's like, you need something more than just the essence if you're going to have an existing material object. Mm-hmm. So it can't be matter because matter relies on form to exist. But it can't be form because form alone doesn't have the capacity to create matter from something immaterial. Now, God's immaterial, but he has to decide to create, right? The only thing that's, in some sense, naturally begotten, or something that exists in virtue of the nature of what God is, just because God exists, this other thing now exists, are the second and third person of the Trinity.
Yeah.
Right? We say it in the Creed. That's what he's talking about, right? He says, begotten, not made. How amazing is that, right? God made material objects, but Jesus is not made. He's begotten. It might be helpful to pull up the specific philosophic definition of beget. A mode of origin or causation, the effect shares the same essence or nature as its source. In virtue of the essence, what it is, it creates something else. So there's basically begotten. When something's begotten, it's involuntarily made. It just happens to be there because, right?
Yeah.
But made, there's an intention. Someone's doing something. So it can't be that, and it can't be matter added to a form later. I'm not going to go into what that means. So in true hylomorphic fashion, matter must be in the essence of a material object. It can't be form and then add matter later. The essence needs to have matter in it. So this is the big step he's taking right here, is that he's adding matter to what the essence, or like I said, the cause of being. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. The what it is something. So then he also says it can't be a relation or something begotten from form, which I kind of just went over. For this would be accidental. It can't be that matter and form are related in such and such a way. That was very confusing stuff, or it's just difficult. So he eventually, in paragraph 3, gets to saying, the essence of a composite substance is the composition of form and matter. That's what it is. So the cause of being of a material object is the actual composition of form and matter. Now we can do something quite eloquent and put this together. It can't be matter because this relies on form, right? Mm-hmm. Essence of composition. It can't be form because form cannot create on its own something which is material, right? Mm-hmm. Can't create on its own matter, basically. So it has to be the composition of the two. And what's going on here? There's basically a metaphysical and logical relationship going on here, because you can't have form existing in spatio-temporal reality, that is space and time, right? You can't have form existing in spatio-temporal reality without matter, but you can't have matter without form. So the only way either of these things can exist is if there's a composition of the two. That's ultimately what he's saying and arguing in the first 3 lines. Can't be form or matter alone, because both of those existing in our world and for a material object rely on them being composed first. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's gorgeous, to be sure. Okay. So now, that was the prelude. Now we get into the hard stuff. If we don't finish, that's okay. Okay. So then he starts to talk about basically some problems with such a thesis, and he's going to basically disseminate them. He's going to show ultimately why they're not really problems, and or at least he's going to expose why they're not problems. Yeah. So the first thing is that, well, I think reading it might be a little better so you can. So it says, because matter is the principle of individuation, it might seem to follow that essence, which embraces in itself both form and matter, the essence of a material object embraces both form and matter, is only particular and not universal. If this were true, it would follow that universals could not be defined. Granted, the essence is what is signified by the definition. Okay, what the hell does that mean? Well, so here. So principle of individuation. So it's a rather simple idea. He's saying that which makes one object distinct from another is matter. Mm-hmm. So why is he saying this? Well, and I will say this is what I certainly don't agree with Aquinas. You need a little more, and I love what Scotus says about it, but I'll bring it up. Well, obviously I'm going to bring it up, or this is about Aquinas. We're not really critiquing his view a whole lot. We're just getting it on the table, figuring out what he's trying to say. So the principle of individuation is matter. Why? Because, remember, forms are always a species, right? So we have the form of humanity, or man. So our form is the rational soul, right? That makes us what we are. We're talking about form or essence in the sense of like epistemologically understanding what something is, right? Yeah. We're not talking anymore about ontology, what causes the existence. What causes our existence as material things is the composition of form and matter. Now we're talking about essence in the sense of understanding what something is, which you know it through the genus plus the difference, right? Mm-hmm. Rational, the difference, soul, the genus. Sensitive soul, technically. A rational, sensitive soul. So you and I have, quite literally, according to Aquinas, the same exact form. There's no difference between you and I on the level of immaterial or the idea. We have the same form. What makes you Nathan and me Tyler is that we have different matter. Yeah. And so, like, if you draw the Porphyrian tree and you have man, so rational soul. Remember, the final real species, italicized species, is when there's no further difference you can make other than the individual. So then you have Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Homer, right? What makes Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and Homer, despite them having the same exact form, they have the same form, they're just rational animal, is Socrates' matter. That's what it is. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. We talked about this before, actually.
Okay,
I remember.
good. So what's his problem? Or what's he saying might appear to be the problem? Because matter is the principle of individuation, it might seem to follow that an essence, which embraces itself both form and matter, is only particular and not universal. So here's the problem. Essence, the what something is. I get a little confused when he's talking about epistemologically or ontology. But so essence is universal, right? The essence of man is rational animal. That's a universal. But he's just said that the essence of a material object has matter in it. The problem with matter being in it is that matter is completely unknowable. That's why. Why? Because matter alone... Oh, yes. Remember when we talked about how... Yes. I'm going to butcher a little bit of this, but you'll obviously get the main points, which is going to be the important part of this. Knowing the very, very nuanced little differences, that's more for the Aquinas scholars. We're not going for pure scholarship here, obviously. Remember, all you can know is that which is necessary, right?
Yeah.
According to them. Because you only know essences, and essences don't change. But you can't know individuals, because what makes something an individual, right, is their matter. But matter is unknowable in and of itself. That's prime matter. You can't know anything about it because there's no form. All you know is forms. But matter is precisely not form. So if the essence has matter in it, remember, you got to follow me here. Essences are what we know, right? That was the whole claim, right? What we know is the form of something, the essence. But if form has matter in it and matter's unknowable, it seems like we can't know. In essence. At least it's in entirety. You see the problem here?
Yeah.
So he's acknowledging, well, what's going on here. So that's why he says this were true, it would follow that universals could not be defined. Why? Because you can't know matter, so you can't define it. Granted that the essence is what's signified by the definition. What we must realize is that matter, which is the principle of individuation, is not just any matter, but designated matter. That's his move. So, when we're talking about matter as the principle of individuation, we can just add here, we can say designated matter. And what is designated matter? It's matter which you can point to. It's just hard. It's that kind of matter.
Yeah.
Which means he's got to draw a distinction here between designated matter and undesignated matter. And it's undesignated matter which we can know in some sense, and what belongs in the essence or the universal of something. We can't know designated matter. We can't know this stuff. Of course, obviously that sounds weird at first, but you can only know things which are necessary. This stuff's not necessary. This could be something else. This could be different wood, for example. 1 second. Okay. So it's undesignated matter which is in. By designated, I mean that which is considered under determinate dimensions. Determinate means it's determined. You can actually see it. It has a definable length. This kind of matter is not part of the definition of man as man, but would enter into the definition of Socrates if Socrates could be defined. That's obvious, right? If we could define Socrates, we would have to say his matter, that matter. So in other words, A way to think about designated matter is if you can say that matter right there, right? But he's not talking about that matter. The definition of man, on the contrary, doesn't include undesignated matter. So if designated matter is things you could point to with your finger and is under determinate dimensions, determinate means you can measure it, basically. What would undesignated matter be?
Is it sort of like what he says with prime matter? Because undesignated, like you're not able to measure it, and it's more of like, well, I guess it's hard because matter can't really be abstract, but it's kind of like the idea of being abstract.
That's really good. You could think about it like a tree of more to less abstract. The most abstract would be prime matter. And then the least abstract would be pure designated matter, the matter of Socrates. And what he's going to say is, so this is unknowable, that's unknowable, but in between here, we can know it to a certain degree. And this is kind of similar, honestly, to even essences, right? There's almost an analog here. Because, so if you kind of had that in like a Porphyrian tree way, right? So the top one is substance, right? But you can't know substance, right?
Yeah.
Because there's no parts to analyze. And then you go down the tree, and then you have Socrates down here, right? So you can't know Socrates. You can't know substance, right? So you can't know the thing at the very bottom, and you can't know the thing at the very top. But you can know all these, right? Because they have a definition, right? Substance, material substance. Material substance that's living. Material substance living with a sensitive soul. Material substance living with a sensitive and rational soul. And then you can't know that and that. Likewise, you can't know prime matter, the top genus. You can't know the bottom, designated matter. But you can know the matters in between. There's an exact analog. And what is this? In this definition, we put not particular bone and particular flesh. So particular bone and flesh would be my bones and my flesh. But we say bone and flesh absolutely, which are a kind of undesignated matter in man. So bone and flesh absolutely, you have right here, absolutely. Why? Well, he's basically saying it's not of the essence of man that we have this particular bone, right? Because if the essence of man was that we had my bones, then all people would be me, logically. But when we have bone and flesh absolutely, he's basically saying bones and flesh in general. Humans always have bones and flesh, generally speaking. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But it's undesignated, of course, because there is no bones and flesh absolutely right here, you know. What's interesting is that I think some people have said, I think it might be false. I don't know if it's false or if it's debated, but this idea of rational soul and bones and flesh absolutely, I think some people have propounded the idea that Christ's human nature was that human nature. Like he had the human nature.
Like I feel like that makes sense because he is like the perfect man, you know, the new Adam. So
right.
It makes sense that he holds literally the
human nature we talk about.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. That literally, I'll have to look it up. That's either true or a heresy. I don't know. We can look that up at some point. But it's pretty cool. So that's undesignated matter. Undesignated matter being, of course, bones and flesh, absolutely. To sort of deflate the abstraction of it, put it in more human terms, It's just the kind of matter that thing has. So necessarily, if you're a human being, you will have bones and flesh of some type. But remember, it's undesignated because it's not totally determinate, right? Once you have an individual, they will have the final determination of that bones and flesh. And that's where the analog doesn't map onto essence, because we just have the essence rational animal. I guess that would just... then we all have the same human. I don't know. I guess honestly in that theory, under this particular way of seeing things hylomorphically, Christ would have to have the bones and flesh, absolutely. I don't know. Who knows? Okay. So paragraph 5. It is clear then that the difference between the definition of man and Socrates lies in designated versus undesignated matter. The definition of man has bones and flesh, absolutely. The definition of Socrates would have these bones and these flesh. Now, of course, we can't define these bones and these flesh, but nonetheless, you get the picture. Okay. So, I think at this point, we've definitely covered some of it, but I'm just going to try to propound this, and I should have printed my Aristotle paper I wrote in grad school because I really articulated it well there. But so he's going to talk about the meaning of bodies and different bodies. This is kind of how he sees. Oh, yes. Okay. How am I going to sum all this up? Let's see what I say here. The analog getting more and more designated about what you wrote about there. More and more designation. That the essence of the species is implicit in the essence of the genus, but in an undetermined way, all the way to the most indeterminate of the essence substance. This shows at the bottom. Okay. Oh, this is cool. Okay. This is really cool. This is what's going on here. This is definitely very abstract, but I think it's very handleable. Here's the idea. All essences, we're talking about essences in the sense of like definition, are in or implicit, that is there but kind of like hidden, in the genus, but in an indeterminate way. Now, what does that mean? So, here's the idea. Aquinas here solves a problem. This is amazing. In this statement, he solves the problem of apparent contradictions in essences and shows us how ontologically only species exist and more general forms don't exist. Here's how it works. Essences are, so I'm going to draw the Porphyrian tree in a very funny way. All essences are implicit in the genus, but in an indeterminate way. So we take the highest genus, substance. Now, every being is a substance, right? But only beings are particular beings, right? There's you, there's tigers, there's vegetables, etc. But they're all substances, right? So in this idea, it's basically, think about it in terms of ideas. In this idea of what a substance is, implicit or kind of in there is every single form of every kind of being. And so you start to go down the tree, right? And so you go material and immaterial. Material, immaterial. Okay. So implicit in substance, in the concept of substance, are that they can be material and that they can be immaterial. Right? And then we have in the idea of, so if you actually write this out, material substance, in the idea, or in the essence, it's really the essence, whatever the essence of material substance is both animate and inanimate material beings. And then implicit in animate beings are both sensitive, that is animals, and vegetative souls. Another way of saying this is those which can locomote on their own and those which cannot locomote. Locomote means to bring yourself into motion on your own. Plants can't move themselves. Animals can. And then you have, of course, implicit and sensitive soul is, so this is where I'm going to explain both things that he does here. What it means for there to be an increasingly higher amount of determination. So then you have rational soul and irrational soul. So here's the problem he's solving. It's deep in the text, but it's almost impossible to pull out, as you know, because it's ridiculous. Ridiculously abstract. Here's the problem. So I'm saying, right, remember, the essence of something is implicit in its genus. So the essence of rational soul is implicit in the genus of sensitive soul. So whatever a sensitive soul is, whatever its essence is, implicitly within that is the essence of a rational soul. Because why? Because we don't... Oh, this is a really good way to put it, actually. If the entire essence of, like, rational soul was not already inside the think about it in terms of like information. Like a rational soul gives us information, right? Like there's a particular piece of knowledge that comes with rational soul. If what is meant or the information contained within rational soul was not already in here in sensitive soul, we would have to add information from like outside the tree. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You'd have to like from like left field, right? Just insert something in there. But we don't do that. We can't do that. And so what's really amazing, right, is like, so all the information of what is known by rational soul has to be in here. And then you go up the tree. Everything having to know about sensitive soul has to be in animated soul in general. And then that has to be a material soul. And then substance, right? So the first genus, the highest genus of substance, actually has, though in an indeterminate way, and I'll bring up why in an indeterminate way, the notion of substance alone, or being alone, basically, has in it all the information for every object. Because if it didn't, then you'd have to add info from left field. And it's like, where are you getting that? Mm-hmm. So literally, and this pays a lot of homage to like why metaphysics is like the highest science. Because being itself, which would basically be substance here, in it somehow has all the knowledge of everything. Which is fantastic, of course. And of course, this makes sense because insofar as being itself turns out to be God, God has all knowledge of everything.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And I guess it also makes sense as well because, like, going back to, like, simpler things or, like, well, I don't know. I guess it it still makes sense because substance is like the simplest, like, I guess, kind of
concept.
Yeah, concept of like anything.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it makes sense that it goes back to just, you know, one, like,
Yes.
because, you know, God is one.
Yes.
God is like, does God have, is God, so I know God doesn't have like essay as in, you know.
No. Yes, I know what you're at. God, properly speaking, is not a substance. Because a substance is something which has essay, as you were saying, something which has being. But God doesn't have being, he is being. Okay. So properly speaking, he's not a substance, because a substance signifies, remember the word signify means call to mind. Mm-hmm. A substance calls to mind a thing. Someone says to you, you know, what is a substance? The simplest answer you give, a substance is a thing.
Yeah.
Right? Or you'd say it's anything. And so you actually see what's funny about anything, the word, these just don't really come to your mind, but the word anything, oh gosh, I just said time. Anything, split that up. Anything. Substance literally means anything there is, right? And then so when someone also says nothing, that quite literally means no thing. There's no thing there. That blew my mind when I saw that in grad school. Sick. So, okay. So, yes. So substance has within it implicitly the information of all things. But why is it indeterminate? And why does this go from increasingly more determinate? More determinate. So basically here. If it was fully determinate, we're going to say determinate means something like it's totally complete as to what that thing is. There's no more perfection to be added. And I don't want to take a lot of time if I can't find it right away. But like he says, yes, like where he says, the term body, therefore, can signify that which has such a form as allowing the determination of three dimensions in it, prescinding from everything else, so that from that form no further perfection may follow. So something which is completely determinate means it's, according to what its nature is completely perfect as to what it could be. There's nothing more you could add to it or get from it. There's no more precision you could make as to what it is. It's totally it. It's like a stopping ground. It's done. It is what it is. But you can see, right, with sensitive soul, we're not totally determinate yet, because there's still more things we could make out of it. Namely, we could make this sensitive soul irrational or rational. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So this is not perfect yet, basically. Something is completely perfected or completely determinate once no more differences can be had in its essence. You can't divide rational soul up. So basically, in other words, it's not until you get to the individual, right? Socrates, Plato, Homer, Aristotle, that you once you get to the level of individual, it's completely determinate. And it has to be like this for the following reason. I'll just draw this here. Sensitive soul, right? This produces rational and irrational. If this was completely determinate, like it was a full-fledged concept, and no more perfection could be added, it is what it is, and you want to say that derived from that, gotten from it, is rational and irrational, then you're saying there's a contradiction in this concept. Because Something can't be what it is and both be rational and irrational. That's the problem. Like if you said sensitive soul is completely determinate, but we can get human and animal from it, then what you've said is sensitive souls are both rational and irrational. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But obviously that's a contradiction. That is, something is two things which both cannot exist in the same time and in the same respect are existing at the same time in the same respect, which would be impossible. So, that's why these things become increasingly more determinate. They're not fully done until they get to this point, because if they were fully done, then there would be a contradiction in its essence, and therefore it wouldn't exist. Which means, this is the beautiful part and why I said one, he solves an epistemological problem, but also shows how he becomes a nominalist. That is, he basically thinks universals only exist in particulars rather than thinking they exist up in the sky like Plato. Obviously up in the sky is metaphorical. Why? Well, if it's indeterminate, we'll draw it, indeterminate, then, right, if it was determinate, then it would finally truly exist, right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But if it truly existed, sensitive soul, this is a FYI, a really, really good argument against Plato. Not that I have much skin in the game, but if you're ever wondering. If sensitive souls in themselves existed, they were fully determinate without being an irrational sensitive soul or a rational sensitive soul. Well, they have to be indeterminate or else there would be a contradiction, right? So they can't fully exist, right? So that means substance in and of itself doesn't really exist because it's completely indeterminate. The only things which really exist, for material objects at least, right? Well, I don't know if I want to say that. We'll say excluding. Actually, he'll address God with some of this, so I'm at liberty to say this at the moment. Because God's not a thing, so he's actually outside this whole categorization of substance right here, right? He's not actually a substance, so we're not saying that God doesn't exist in this regard. Obviously, you don't want a philosophy which would preclude God existing, because that would be false. I don't even say that on like a reverency point of view. I'm just like, philosophically, he clearly does exist, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have a philosophy which would make him not exist, that's going to be wrong. So this is what's really amazing about this. They can only exist once you get down to the final determination. Rational soul, irrational soul. Those are the only actual things that exist. So sensitive soul is going to be indeterminate. Okay, what was I thinking? So sensitive soul is indeterminate, but it's more, that's what I was trying to say. It's more determinate than animate, right? Because it's more of a clear concept. And then animate's more determinate than matter, right? Because once we add the difference in matter, remember these are differences, of animate and inanimate, now we have animate matter or inanimate matter. So it's a more perfected concept. It's becoming more clear. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then you have sensitive soul is more clear than just an animate soul. And vegetative soul is more clear than just an animate soul. But remember, something that's not a final species can't exist because if it did, it couldn't exist because you can't have it because it's a contradiction, right? Like, sensitive soul can't actually exist because if it actually existed, since it plays this ontological role of creating rational souls and irrational souls, if it actually existed, you'd be saying something false. Because if you said it actually existed, then you'd be saying there's a contradiction in its essence.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And something obviously with a contradiction in its essence can't exist because no essence has a contradiction. So it's only when you get down to the final species where the only difference you can make is the individual. It's only when you get to the final species where there isn't a contradiction in its essence if it existed. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So, no contradiction in essence if existed. So, that being said, these things, if you would like to say that universals exist, can exist because there's no contradiction. If you want to say universals exist, you can't say sensitive soul exists because that means it's a determinate concept. That determinate concept would have a contradiction in it, both rational and irrational, and it actually can't exist. So like Plato, right? If he wants to say like the form of substance, I know he doesn't actually say that. Or, we could just make something actually real. If you wanted to say like the form of material substance actually exists, well, you would have to make that a determinate concept. Must be a determinate concept. But that determinate concept is going to have a contradiction in it, namely animate matter and inanimate matter. And so it actually can't exist. So the only universal that can exist is the species. And then what brings this universal into being? What do you think it is? What brings the universal? So we're still at the mode of essence, right? But remember, essence itself can't be the cause of being of an object, because then the definition would be the same as mathematics. You would have that immaterial to material problem, right? So this is still immaterial, rational soul. So what brings rational soul into being? What is the cause of the being?
The form plus matter.
Yes. And what kind of matter is when there's form plus matter? Starts with a D.
Yeah, it's the
Designated.
designated matter. Okay.
So we have the undesignated matter here of flesh plus bones, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you get this flesh plus bones, and you get Socrates. It's a brilliant system. It's absolutely brilliant. There's no doubt about it. Now, we will see that there's a few problems with it. Namely, the principle of individuation being matter, I think, can't work. The reasons for it are very abstract, for sure. But, yes. Okay, so that's the idea, is to sum this up. All essences are in or implicit in the genus, but in an indeterminate way. Now you understand how it's indeterminate. It becomes increasingly more determinate as you add perfections to it, and adding perfections to it is adding matter to it, and then animated matter to it, and then sensitive animated matter, and then finally rational sensitive animated matter. Mm-hmm. And once you get to that point, then you finally basically have a real form that can have designated matter out of the factory, so to speak. Add some designated matter to it, bam. So you get down to, let's say, vegetative. This is, we use man a lot. It helps to use a different example. So once you have vegetative soul, then you can go to like oak vegetative soul, right? Now you have that. This is ready to come out of the factory, and you can add some wood and some leaves to it, and you finally have your oak trees. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But you can see that wherever there's a particular individual with designated matter, since this has to be indeterminate, or it would cause a contradiction between oak trees and, vociferous trees, for example, your only real existing forms are going to be the final species. So that's what he's solving here. He's told you the cause of being is the composition, and then he solved the problem of matter being in the essence. Matter is in the essence in an undesignated way. And this fits perfectly because when you can finally get into the designated matter, we actually have, when you look at kind of the epistemology of the indeterminacy throughout the Porphyrian tree, when you finally get to designated matter, you're ready to you have the species that's ready to come out of the factory and produce a particular individual. So yes, and then of course in short sum, the idea is he's basically explaining what is going on epistemologically that is in the realm of knowledge alone, how we can, you know what he's doing? He's telling a story of how it is coherent, given our concepts, that we can put matter in the essence. That is what I've done. I've just justified why it makes sense to put matter in the essence of things. You got a designated, undesignated matter. Okay. So I'm going to skip some of the stuff he talked about with bodies. It's not super important. And I'm going to say one last thing about this, and we can call chapter 2 a day. If it is the case that chapter 3, the rest of the chapters calls that we need to rely on something I'm not going to talk about with chapter 2, and I'll just mention it. So I'm going to turn to determination of genus. Yes. Okay. That's really the biggest part of this, is that whole thing. But so yes, he sums it up really well. I don't know why he doesn't say this in the beginning of the paragraph. At the beginning of 12, he says, the species is determined relative to the genus through form, and the individual is determined relative to the species through matter. And we can see that obviously with sensitive soul. We determine sensitive soul to rational soul through form. The form of this soul is that it's rational, right? So indeterminate, now determinate. So that would pay homage to the species is determined relative to the genus through form. And then the individual, Socrates, this is finally determined through matter, right? This is when he gets his designated matter. The form is fully determinate, out of the factory, ready to get matter. So this is why essence is the species, of course. The final species must have matter in it. For its difference is matter. That which makes the species more determinate is matter itself. Remember, all the info necessary has to be inside of Socrates is more determinate than rational soul, right? But all the info has to be in the species, right? Implicitly. So that's why we have the undesignated matter of flesh and bones, absolutely. So we just need the undesignated matter in the essence so it can be further perfected in virtue of an actual human being at that point. What was that part about form? Yes. This is the last thing I want to say in this regard. There's also a cool thing about humanity. I would need to review it again to really aptly explain it, but it seems to be something like when you're defining things in a certain sense, you don't need to include the matter. So we can't say Socrates is humanity because humanity doesn't have matter implicit in it. But Socrates is a man, we can say, because man has matter implicit in it. It's kind of the idea. But, so, there's a analog here So Aristotle gets pretty close in his metaphysics with saying that matter is basically genus and form's basically species. Here's why. If you have sensitive soul and you say this is matter, well, matter is indeterminate until it receives a form, right? And so then the difference, so this is genus, so then the difference of rational, this would be the form, which determines this matter into man, right? So it's tempting to say that genus is matter and rational, and the form is the difference, which would be rational in this case. But he is careful not to identify genus with matter and difference as form, actually. Man is a rational animal, but he's not composed of rational animal. So this is, again, the distinction between epistemology and metaphysics. The distinction. Because it's true epistemologically that Socrates is a rational animal as far as his essence is concerned in the pure realm of knowledge, how we know things. But in the realm of ontology, he's not a rational animal, right? We're back to what is the essence, the cause of being of a material object. Well, the cause of being of Socrates is not rational animal. We discussed this at the beginning of this. The cause of being can't just be the essence. The cause of being has to be the composition of the two, because the composition of the two ontologically in the realm of being is prior to both a form itself and matter itself. So when we say he's a rational animal, we say he's his form in the sense of quiddity, what it is to be a man. That's his form, his definition, but man is himself not a definition, is the idea. We are not like a definition, clearly. We have a definition. So man in this sense is what he's made of, and not rational animal. You don't say man is made of rational animal. Man, so why does he not say that genus is matter and form is species? Well, because if genus is matter, then sensitive soul is what he's made of, and rational is what he's made of. So you're saying Socrates is made of rational soul, but he's not made of rational soul. So if you're being very literal with your terms, he's not. You can't say genus just is matter and form just is rational. So he's composed of matter and form. So, yes, we are, of course, what are we made of? We're made of form and matter. But if you equate that with genus and man, you have a problem, because then you don't really get the matter anymore. Because then if we're composed of form and matter is genus plus form, and we are sensitive rational soul, then we would be saying we're composed of rational soul. So yes, he's saying that we can't be that. So genus can't be matter and form can't be thing. But of course, there's a really big analogy here, because matter's indeterminate and it's determined by what form it gets, right? So there's an analogy here, but remember, we're studying on being and essence. We're studying a metaphysical treatise that Aquinas actually wrote, I believe in 1256, for his fellow Franciscans, in which case he's trying to get very clear about, this is the final note I'll say, because we actually basically are done, but we can call it there. The real thing I had to show you was designated matter, indesignated matter, and determinacy. But what's interesting is that this is a metaphysical treatise written particularly for his friends who do, philosophy. And so this whole book is basically defining terms.
Yeah.
That's what he's basically doing. So, okay, I think that's it. Yeah, that's all I got. Do you have anything?
I don't think so. That cleared it all up. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, good.